Okay, and welcome to part 2 of the social regulation of emotions. So what we're going to be focusing on in this video is the organismic model. So as I mentioned in the previous video, there are 3 models we're going to be looking at: organismic, interactionist, and emotion work. So this is the first. This is the organismic. There are different kinds of organismic models. I'm not giving this general overview of all of them. I'm focusing on one in particular, specifically the perspective that views our emotions in terms of our evolution, in terms of our biological evolution. So from this perspective, we're focusing on biology, the biological determinants of our emotional states. We are not, when we're thinking about this evolutionary organismic model, we're not thinking about emotions as emerging from social factors or social conditions. That's going to be come up in the arguments later, the interactionist and emotion work models. But again, this model is incredibly important because it really provides the foundation for the arguments that come later. Anyway, so what we're seeing here in this perspective is emotions as these automatic responses to stimuli. So these environmental phenomena that trigger physiological, biological changes in our bodies. And those biological responses are emotions. I know that's abstract, it's a bit confusing. Gonna elaborate, gonna make that more concrete. But for right now, emotions are as biological is where your head should be. There are particular responses, the particular emotions that we developed over time, they evolved, right? So over time, natural selection selected for particular kinds of emotional responses that helped our ancestors survive and pass on their genes. In other words, looking back through human and hominid and just mammalian and animal evolution over millions of years, animals have reacted in lots of different ways in lots of different situations. Some of those reactions got them killed, some of them kept them alive and allowed them to reproduce. Those behaviors, those reactions that kept them alive and allowed them to reproduce continue to exist, whereas others went away. And our emotions emerge out of the same process. So in other words, the physiological responses that we have help to ensure our survival and got passed on from generation to generation. And so our emotions are a result of that biological legacy. So emotions from this perspective are rooted in the body. We experience them in the body. And so we're thinking of emotions as literally those sensations that we feel in our body. Right? So if you think about emotional states, happiness, sadness, anger, whatever, we feel them physically. And we use the word feeling as a synonym for emotions. And that's not a mistake. Right? The word feeling is a very appropriate word to describe our emotions because we physically feel them. So, for example, let's think about anger. And when I say that, I want to think about how we experience anger physically, how we experience anger in our bodies, right? Not what we're thinking about, not what our goals are, but how we experience anger in our bodies. So how does anger feel in our body? I'm not going to say every time we feel angry, we experience all of these things. I'm going to give a list right now, but these are generally the kinds of things that we feel when we're angry. So we get a rush of energy. We tend to feel more energetic. Our bodies move more. We breathe more heavily, we take deeper breaths, we breathe more quickly. We will maybe feel flushed or hot. Our faces will get redder or darker. Our muscles tense. And when our muscles tense, they form into fists a lot of times, or we draw our lips back. As we get angrier and angrier, we feel it in our muscles. Our hands can start to shake. We can get a rush of this feeling of physical strength, right? We feel it's still stronger. And also we can have difficulty thinking or focusing. And the angrier you are, the less able to really think rationally you're going to be able to the less you're going to be able to do that, the less you're going to be able to think rationally. And so anger feels a certain way, but it also looks a certain way. We can recognize when other people are angry. And we can recognize when we ourselves are angry if we have that self-awareness. So what does anger look like? Quick side note, the way anger looks, the way it manifests in terms of how it looks visually, is deeply connected to how it feels in the body of the person who was angry. And we can point out in some cases why that is. So what does anger look like? Well, this is clearly an image of someone who is angry. If I just showed you this image and didn't put it in the context of a conversation with anger, and I said, well, what is this person feeling? You would know immediately it's anger, because we've all seen this. We've all made this expression to some degree. It's very clearly angry. The face is tense, so mentioned muscles getting tense. Well, your face clenches up, the teeth are exposed, right? It's hard to tell from this, but it looks like the person in the image is leaning forward aggressively. And so, yeah, I mean, clearly there are these physical indicators. This person, again, mouth open, hands opened up, taking up space. Another person, mouth open. Mouth open is a very clear indicator of anger. This pointing aggressively, the scrunched up face, again, look at the eyes. A line of people who are clearly angry, right? It's not difficult to tell. You can recognize this with anybody. What about body language? Well, you'll see people have their fists clenched, even in situations where people aren't thinking they're going to fight, right? If you ever found yourself getting angry, your fists will naturally start to clench. It's scary looking to other people, but that's what happens because, again, your muscles tense. When your muscles tense, your fingers retract into a fist. You're not thinking, oh, I'm going to start fighting, but naturally when your muscles tense, that happens, okay? So your muscles tense. We lean towards people, or we move closer to other people. We pointing in terms of calling them out, but we take up more space, right? So we expand. So you can see this guy has his arm. Well, it's hard. I'm not really in full frame, but you widen your stance. You take up more physical space. Also, if you can tell, another instance here where this guy's leaning in. Right, we lean in, we get closer to the person or to the object of our anger. We don't back away from it, we lean into it, right? So why do we have an emotion that does all this to us? This stuff doesn't help us in our day-to-day lives, right? I mean, how often is it useful for you to bare your teeth at somebody, or point aggressively at them, or lean in at them, or to have your fist clenched? Though that's not helpful for us in our day-to-day lives, to have our minds stop working because we're just so enraged. But we do have these emotions, and everybody has them to one degree or another. Obviously, some people get angrier than others. Some people are able to control their anger better than others, but it's very much there. It's very much present in humans. So why do we have this? Well, it's really important to think about how we evolved. I mean, how did we become the animal that we are? Because we, make no mistake about it, we are animals. We are physical beings. We are animals, no different than cats, dogs, insects, gorillas, apes, chimpanzees, birds. We are animals, okay? We evolved the same way other animals do. And so it's important to think about the environment that we evolved within, because our emotions helped us survive in that environment, right? Our emotions are survival mechanisms. So it's helpful to think about then, what kind of environment did we evolve to exist within? So if we want to understand our biological or emotions biologically, we need to look at the environment in which they emerged, in which they evolved. So that leads to the question of, what is our natural environment? What does it mean to say that human beings have an environment in which we naturally live, right? Well, where do we spend our time now? Right? Well, clearly, I mean, we exist in environments, right? We exist in physical spaces. We exist in social spaces. Well, we exist in offices, cubicles. We exist in classrooms. We exist on the highway. We exist all kinds of places. But is this our natural environment? And by natural environment, I don't mean, is this our environment where we spend a lot of our day now? No, I mean, what I'm getting at is this question of what kind of environment did we evolve to exist within, right? What kind of environment did our emotions develop within, and where were they helpful in terms of keeping us alive? Well, is this then, by that definition, do we live in our natural environment? No, we totally do not. The environment in which we live now, or environments in which we live now, are completely different than those that we evolved to exist within. Those that our emotions, this is the key thing, those that our emotions prepared us to live within. Human beings evolved to live as hunter-gatherers. Human beings and as Homo sapiens, right? Not humans. Humans have been around for about, I want to say 10 million years, something like that. There's been well over a dozen different kinds of humans, but humans as Homo sapiens evolved to live as hunter-gatherers. We evolved to live in small groups of between 50, 150 people that were nomadic. They didn't live in one place all year round. They traveled around, they followed herds of animals, they got their food from hunting and gathering food in the area. They weren't farming, they didn't work in factories. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers. And those nomadic hunter-gatherers, which is how human beings, or Homo sapiens, spent the vast majority of our existence. Human beings have been around for about, or again, Homo sapiens, sorry, have been around for about 150, 200,000 years. And let's say we've been around for 200,000 years. About 188,000 of those years we spent as hunter-gatherers, not as farmers, not as factory workers, not as people who worked in front of computers, but as hunter-gatherers. And so we evolved to live in nature. So what's nature then? If the highway and the classroom and the office building isn't nature, well, what is nature? When you hear the word nature, or you think about, oh, I want to get back to nature, or I want to get away from other people and I just want to get into the natural world, things pop into your head, right? This person who's in a park laying there probably is thinking, oh, it's so good to be back to nature. Or the person on the hiking trail, or the person sitting on a dock in front of a lake near mountains, or the other person in this other beautiful hiking trail. Oh, it's so good to get away. Nature is so refreshing. But are any of these natural environments? No, they're not. They're not. These are manufactured environments made for people. This is not the nature in which humans evolved to live within. This is not the nature that other animals exist within. This is our Homo sapiens, humans, version of nature that is safe and is engineered to fit what we want and what we need. Not even just what we need, but what we want our experience to be. We are in a position where we can control nature and make it useful to us while removing the danger. So is this nature? No. No, those are the kind of environments, those are the kind of spaces that we think about when we think about nature, but they're created by people. They're manufactured, safe environments. We don't experience danger, not really, maybe a little bit, but not really any serious amount of danger when we go to a park or we go for hiking in the woods or whatever. Well, what about this kind of space? I mean, surely, definitely, farmers live in nature, right? I mean, they're surrounded by dirt and animals and plants, and they're growing things, right? That's nature, right? I mean, this guy, he's surrounded by green stuff, nature, right? And these two, look at how naturey that is. The guy's shirt says, lettuce, turnip, the beet, I think is what the beet or the beef, I think it's the beet, I'm not sure, but lettuce and turnips and beets, those are plants are nature, right? So clearly these farmers live in nature, right? No, they do not. Farms, modern farms, are some of the most artificial places on earth. Look at these images. Does that occur naturally in nature? No, people make these spaces this way. whoever this is has a gigantic truck or farm thing. I don't know what that is. I actually have no idea what that is. It looks very strange, but it's definitely not natural, right? This is a person who is reshaping the physical environment. Same thing here, same thing here. None of these plants grow this way, and probably don't even exist, except in the context of the way in which we engineer the space for them. So farms are incredibly artificial. What about these beautiful cornfields? No, I mean, look at this. Yeah, there's plants, but this is human engineered. All right. Well, this definitely has to be nature then. Yeah, okay, this is clearly a farm. That's a farmer. But look at all the chickens, right? Chickens, they're nature. They're animals, right? They gotta be nature. And sheep, definitely that's nature. And cows are nature. They're big animals, right? No, they're not. Yes, they're animals, but they're not natural in the sense that they exist in this world that hasn't been engineered by us. The animals that we're used to thinking of as the animals that show up on farms, or the ones that we encounter the most of all, or more than others, aren't natural, because we've been breeding them selectively for about 12,000 years. This is what we think of when we think of pigs. If I say, oh, think of a pig, this is what you think of, right? And we think of them as, well, they're just normal animals, right? Well, they are. I mean, they are animals, obviously, but the pigs as we know them today are animals that have been generated after millennia and millennia of us selectively breeding for particular traits. We wanted animals that were going to be large to produce more meat for us, to produce more food, that were going to be docile, so easy to control, and that were going to be easy for us to maintain. So we selected the animals that best exemplified those characteristics. We had them breed. The ones that were too angry or out of control, the ones that were too small, we didn't let them breed. And over thousands of years, this is what we end up with. Now, are they without any sort of issues for us? No, I mean, it's hard to raise pigs. Like, there's all kinds of, it's not like they're going to just sit there and just make meat, right? They're not, they'll attack people, whatever. But they are much more docile and much more in line with what we want than what pigs would have been in the natural environment. The ancestors of pigs looked like this. This is I'm not going to say this right, Metrodiopteris, so early ancestor of pigs. There's another one, the Entelodont. Look at that thing, it's terrifying. You can't farm that, but over time, animals like this and this, we made into this. So again, even the animals that we're dealing with are selectively bred. Okay, this has to be nature, right? We look at this, these are farmers, but they're not farmers now. There's no big machines or whatever. These are farmers from pre-modern times. These are ancient farmers. So these are farmers from 12, 13,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. Clearly, they live in nature, right? Clearly, they live in the environment in which we evolved to live in. No, they're not, right? This is kind of like supposed to be an image of medieval farmers. But no, even pre-modern farms. When we think about old people in ancient times, you might think about people on farms, but no, the post-agricultural revolution, at the time we moved from hunter-gatherers to farming, that's a transition away from the environment that we evolved to live in. Actually, there's a lot of problems that came with that as well. Like, farming is terrible for human health. Like, it's real bad. But even pre-modern, these more ancient types of farming communities, they were not the kinds of spaces that we evolved to live within. Think about natural plants aren't organized in neat rows on a manicured field. It doesn't matter if the person doing it is, on the back of a machine now, or it was, they're yoking an oxen. That's a farm phrase, right? On a field 12,000 years ago. It's still a manufactured, engineered environment. It's not what we evolved to exist within. So we do not live in nature. at least not nature in the sense of a space that we do not control. When we go out into nature, we go out into this sanitized pseudo-nature that we create to serve our own needs. It's a friendly, protected place. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they lived in nature. Now, obviously, we don't have any images of ancient hunter-gatherers. Here's an artist depiction. We do have modern-day hunter-gatherers, although the degree to which they are the same as our ancestors is up in the air. Like, we don't know. We have no way of knowing. But I mean, our best examples are modern-day hunter-gatherers, and there aren't a lot of them. And they're the ones that are out there. You know, they've been brought into the modern world, you know, in a lot of ways. So we don't have necessarily great examples of what our ancestors were like, but we do have some, right? So you know, these, again, people who are hunting for food and you know, nomadic to a certain extent. But yeah, again, we're pretty limited in what we have for our ability to really learn about hunter-gatherers. There's all kinds of theories, there's all kinds of things that we think about what they would have had to have been like, but it's tough to really know for sure. But regardless, hunter-gatherers live in nature, and real nature is terrifying. When people think, oh, I want to get away from all and recharge, I really want to get back to nature and really reconnect, they are not thinking about actual nature, because actual nature will murder you, okay? Actual nature, animals that live in nature are constantly under the threat of death all the time, because everything wants to kill you. Or even if it doesn't want to kill you, right? Okay, not everything wants to kill you if you're in nature. You know, if you're, you know, a deer and you're living in nature, not everything wants to kill you, but at best, everything wants to kill you, or some things want to kill you, and everything else is indifferent to you. The environment is not there to protect you in any way, right? Your survival is irrelevant to the other animals that are in nature. But regardless, whether or not everything wants to kill you or not, or it's just indifferent, it's super dangerous all the time. You ever watch a nature documentary? Watching a nature documentary is all about watching images of animals that at any moment are going to get eaten by another animal. If you're watching a documentary about fish, there's going to be a fish like, oh, cute little fish swimming by, and then another fish is going to come by, just going to eat it, and it's going to be dead. And you're going to be like, oh, that's interesting how nature works. But that's what most animals deal with. We don't. We think of it as a massive tragedy when one of us, something happens that's surprising that kills one of us. For other animals, that's just the way things are. That's just how it is. And we are detached from that. We are separate from that. Let's take a look at pigs again. Pigs, this is what pigs look like in our world. Pigs have been largely kept safe from nature too, although we slaughter them. But this is what nature looks like. Because I was at a petting zoo yesterday and I saw pigs. I was like, oh, pigs, animals are great. But these things are detached from the natural world. What do pigs look like in nature? That terrifying being of pure malice, that is a warthog. Warthogs are angry. They're not little cute little things that, you know, will be docile and will let us do all kinds of things to them that are horrible. No, that thing will gore you, and without a second thought. That is nature. This is nature. Some lions who had just killed and are now eating some other kind of animal. Oh, and that animal, I'm sure, did not die without pain. Snakes that, again, will bite you and kill you. Wolves. I'm not saying all these animals spend all their time like just as bloodthirsty lunatics, except for the warthog. The warthog clearly just wants murder all the time. But you know, these others, they're perfectly fine to kill if they need to. You know, they don't want to put themselves in danger, but if they need to, they will. And also, any one of them, they're not just killing; could get killed at any point, right? I mean, none of them are safe. I'm sure this fish. Where's my cursor? I'm sure this fish ate something else and then got eaten. right? It's the food chain. But for us, I mean, how much time do you spend being scared that a lion will eat you? And I don't mean like, oh no, what if a lion would eat me? Like having these weird fantasies. I mean, literally, how much of a chance is there that a lion will eat you or a bear will eat you? That would be insane. But in the natural world, animals kill each other all the time. An animal can fully expect, more likely than not, to be killed and eaten by another animal. And that's what nature is. And that's what our ancestors existed within. And even if we put aside other animals, we have the natural environment that we largely control now, wildfires, volcanoes, whatever. That's the kind of spaces in which our ancestors lived. Also, there's also the danger of other people too. Generally other hunter-gatherer groups, but also within the groups themselves. We think that within hunter-gatherer groups, there was a lot of, it was mainly egalitarian, a very equal, probably this really intense focus on group harmony and solidarity. They really would need to be if people are going to survive. But, you know, there's also going to be within group conflict too. But so other people can certainly have been a danger. Now the thing is, so all this nightmare fuel, right? This is all the environment. This is the kind of environments in which our ancestors lived. Now, we are biologically identical to our hunter-gatherer ancestors who evolved to survive in that world. The hunter-gatherers that still exist now, the hunter-gatherers that existed 12,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago, they are biologically identical to us. If you were born into a hunter-gatherer group, you would have grown up and existed just fine among that group. If a baby from an early hunter-gatherer group was just taken as a newborn and brought into the modern world, that baby would grow up and there would be no indication that there was anything different about them, because there is nothing different about them, because we are identical. You are no different than they were. We're the same. So we're biologically identical. We evolved to live in that space. So let's go back to anger, which, if you remember, is what we started talking about, right? We started with that slide, like, let's think about anger, and showed you angry faces or whatever. You know, so let's get back to that. So we looked at what anger looks like. Well, why does anger look that way? Well, when people's muscles tense, their mouths open and they bare their teeth. Well, that's what other animals do too. We're not, when we do this, when we bare our teeth, we're not thinking, oh, I'm getting ready to bite. But that is a holdover. That's an evolutionary holdover from our evolution, when our evolutionary ancestors, whether they were Homo sapiens or other animals, you know, the whatever shared ancestors we have with other hominids or with apes, they would bite, or they would at least show their teeth as a sign of willingness to fight. So it's a sign of aggression. So is leaning in. Our ancestors had to defend themselves, and so they had to demonstrate a willingness to defend themselves. And that signal itself can say, hey, I'm willing to fight, I'm willing to, I'm angry. And that can convince a predator or another person or some other source of danger to back off, right? So when we get angry and bare our teeth, it's no different than when this chimp bares its teeth. I mean, again, it's the exact same thing. Similarly here, when we see these images of people screaming with their mouths open, again, you know, tend to be leaning in, it's no different to animals. It's weird. It's like, if I talk about this, it's almost as if I feel like some people are gonna hear this and they're gonna take it as if I'm mocking people. I'm calling, like, oh, people are animals, whatever. I mean, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying we are animals. There's no difference, but that's not an insult, right? I mean, the things that we do are not all that detached from what lions do, what dogs do, what chimps do, what gorillas do. We think about those things in different terms, but we're acting the way they do. And our body language reflects that. And our body language comes from this legacy of evolution. So we bare our teeth, you know, when our muscles tense, we bare our teeth, you know, again, like our fists clench and so on. When we get angry, we expand to take up more space, to appear more threatening, just like there's a cute little kitten right here. But when you are faced with either a dangerous predator or another member of your animal species, so if you're a human being and there's another human being who's looks like they're potentially dangerous or intimidating or whatever, you want to make yourself appear larger. I say you want, I mean, you're not conscious thinking, I want to make myself appear larger, but we puff our chests out, we spread our arms, our stances get wider to take up more space and to appear more threatening. We do it without thinking about it, just like other animals. This guy expanding to take up more space, he's also leaning in aggressively, getting closer, just like this bird. It's the bird's called a H-O-A-T-Z-I-N, Watson. Oh, in my notes over here, I didn't do this on purpose. I was just, trying to think about how I was going to talk about this image and this image. And so the way I labeled this guy on my notes, I labeled this as Dude and Watson. So this is Dude and Watson. It's like a bad sitcom. But anyway, taking up space, leaning in, just like this bird, spreading its wings to appear more threatening. This could be a display to chase away a rival bird who is encroaching in territory or is trying to steal a mating opportunity, or could be in response to a predator and trying to say, like, no, don't screw with me, I'm dangerous. So we evolved to live in nature, or in that version of nature, but we no longer do. But we still have the biology of animals who had to fight to survive, who sometimes had to get really angry, who sometimes had to appear large and threatening, who sometimes had to bare their teeth, who sometimes had to turn their hands into clenched fists, take up a space, like get aggressively in people's faces. That's the space in which we evolved, which leads to a pretty important question. Is anger useful in the modern world? If we evolved to be like this because we had to survive, and we are biologically identical to our ancestors who needed to be this way, well, that means we are left with the biological equipment that they had too. So our anger responses are the same as theirs, except we don't live in that space anymore. So is anger useful? Is anger appropriate to the modern world? And in many ways, no. In fact, I would say in most ways, right? There is a major, major disconnect between the environment in which we lived and the environment in which we evolved to live. We are not prepared biologically for the world we live in. And that causes us major problems. So for instance, we get mad at each other on the highway, it leads to road rage incidents, where people seem wildly disproportionately angry for something that's not a big deal. Well, why the hell is that? Why do people get so angry about, like getting cut off in traffic or something? I'm not even talking about when somebody almost causes an accident that could hurt someone. I'm talking about just, they don't yield or something. Why do we get so mad? We think about people who get that anger, like that person's crazy, what's wrong with them? But not really, though. I'm not saying it's right. It's not right to get wildly angry, but it makes sense, though, because again, we have the biological equipment that evolution gave us. So now when we're in situations when we experience anger, our body doesn't understand that, someone cutting us in line at the grocery store is not the same as trying to scare away a hungry lion who's thinking about killing us. So our body reacts in both situations the same way. Like your anger at the grocery store is rooted in the same mechanisms that lead to the anger and the aggressiveness that comes from facing a life-threatening predator, right? And so we end up with all these crazy headlines. Like I go ahead and just hop on Google and type in, argument and murder, or argument and assault, or argument and fight, and you'll end up with all these crazy stories. Now these are outliers. These are ones that are particularly ridiculous, but there are things like this that happen all the time. So man pleads guilty in deadly fistfight outside Tampa nightclub. Probably two people who were arguing about something dumb, certainly not something that was worth dying over, and one of them killed another one. They beat the hell out of each other until one of them was dead. I mean, it's because they reacted with intense anger the same way our ancestors did. This, I want to laugh about this. On the one hand, I want to laugh, but on the other hand, like, there's a guy who's dead now. Argument over James Brown's height leads to shooting in Alabama. James Brown is the singer, the late singer. Two people were arguing about his height, and one of them shot the other. I believe it was a fatal shooting, I think. But, you know, how does someone get that angry about James Brown's height? Well, again, nobody gets angry about James Brown's height. It's just that our body generates that level of anger. Your body doesn't know the difference. And yeah, I mean, it's that doesn't mean every time we get, this makes it sound like every time we get angry, we're getting so out of control that we're gonna do violence, and clearly that's not the case. But this type of thing makes more sense when you see it in the context of these of our evolution, right? It makes a lot more sense, and it makes it less. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The next time you want to say, "How can this happen?" Remember that this is, again, our I keep repeating this, but our biologies are this is not shocking given the way our emotions evolved to be. So anger and violence are largely rejected by our society, but we evolved, I'm summarizing now, but we evolved to feel angry because anger helped us survive in dangerous situations. Those situations don't really exist in the modern world, at least not to the level that they did, but we still react with these intense levels of anger. Now, what I'm saying right here is anger is not an indicator that something is wrong with a person, at least not biologically. That's how we evolved to be. I don't think I really conveyed this super well with this slide, but what I'm trying to say there is when we see somebody get really angry in a situation where anger doesn't seem appropriate, you know, again, somebody gets wildly angry while driving. Somebody gets wildly angry because someone else is talking at a movie theater or whatever. Somebody just seems like they blow up out of control at a sports event, whatever. We think, what is wrong with that person? But I mean, honestly, again, it's wrong, it's inappropriate, but I think it's a mistake to think in terms of, you know, what's wrong with someone who gets really angry or someone who just like has these anger issues, because that's our body's way of reacting. It's just that now our social environment does not conform with what evolution molded us to be. Well, then, so why aren't we all just wildly angry all the time? Well, because we had to learn over time to suppress. Right? We have to learn to suppress and control our anger. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a little while. But yeah, I mean, a big part of becoming a member of society and being able to be a functional member of the modern world is taking that biology and just suppressing it, keeping a lid on it. But sometimes we're not able to, and it comes out. And yeah, I mean, and it's not shocking. All right, I want to think about another emotion too, and I'm not going to go into as much detail because, you know, again, I don't want this to be 7 hours long, but I do think it's worth looking at another emotion as well, fear specifically, because again, this is another one that, you know, it's, well, like our other emotions, help us survive, and it's also it's something we can all relate to, right? So fear, anxiety, nervousness. So what does fear look like? Well, when we're afraid, we generally withdraw. So rather than taking up a bunch of space, we pull our arms in, we hunch our backs down, and we make ourselves appear small, right? And unthreatening. Unlike when we're angry, when we try to be bigger and you know, we move more quickly, but when we're scared or nervous, we withdraw like this. And it doesn't even have to be when we're physically threatened. When people are nervous and they're giving a presentation or something, or when they're nervous and they're in a class, or like you see a kid who gets in trouble, like they withdraw, right? I mean, we get small. We back away, we move away. So rather than leaning in, we back away. We freeze, we stop moving, right? Not always, but sometimes we panic and we freeze, which makes sense. I mean, if you are in a situation where a predator might kill you, you want your body just to stop moving because you're less likely to be seen at that point. But we can freeze up. We oftentimes can seek out someone stronger, so we cling to someone who might be in a better position to protect us. Sometimes we just hide. We just we just make ourselves not be seen. And there are times when we don't hide, we hide like we're like covering our faces or whatever. And so with fear, we try to make ourselves appear small, non-threatening. Actually, my screen's gonna look a bit weird for a second because I need to pause because my battery's gonna die. Okay. Okay, sorry for that weird interruption. I had to plug my computer in. So where were we? All right. Yeah, so we hide, or we hide. We try to make ourselves appear small and unthreatening. So there are times when we encounter other human beings who might be threatening violence or might be trying to establish dominance. And so we essentially try to physically make ourselves appear small and to say, hey, I am not a threat. I am not challenging you. I am just, don't worry about me. I'm small. Or we literally are hiding to avoid being seen. When I say these things, that's what our fear reactions are. If you are nervous about a test, you don't shrink up in order to avoid the attempts of another human being to establish dominance over you. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that our biological fear response is the same as if we were being hunted, as if you were being hunted by a predator, or you were facing a predator, or you were facing another person who might be willing to hurt you. And when we're doing these things, we don't think about them. We just do them instinctively. So we naturally curl up. We naturally make ourselves feel small. We naturally just kind of like freeze a little bit. And when we do think about our reactions, we often try to not feel those things. Or we wonder why am I scared now? Why am I nervous? Why am I afraid? We often try to get rid of the feelings because they can interfere with our day-to-day lives in really, really serious ways. So for instance, in a job interview, people get really nervous at job interviews. Well, is your life in danger in a job interview? No, hopefully not. That would be weird. But for most of the time, it's not. But job interviews didn't exist in the world in which we evolved. So when we get nervous about job interviews, we have, again, the same emotional equipment that is driving the fear that we had developed. So we get paralyzed by the fear of the job interview, this conversation between you and a non-threatening person. Your body doesn't know the difference. You feel threatened, so your body reacts as if you're threatened. Public speaking is a big one. People are terrified of public speaking. You might be speaking publicly in front of a crowd of people that you will never see again. These are people who have no relevance for your life at all. And it will be terrifying. People are terrified of public speaking. Well, why? What difference does it make? Right? Have you ever had to give a talk in a class or at work or something, or just in front of people, and you'll have someone give you the advice of, well, why are you worried about it? You're never going to see those people again. Don't worry about it. Is there any advice that is less useful than that? That is absolute garbage advice, right? Because the fear is an irrational fear. It's, again, rooted in the biological terror that we face. And it's not something that you can just wipe away or just kind of hand wave away. But it's something that is you do a public speaking event, or you're in a class and you have a presentation that probably isn't worth that many points, and people are terrified about it. I mean, I used to be, God, I can't even tell you how terrified of public speaking I used to be. Like it was a problem. But we're not in danger. So think about it, like, rationally. Why do we feel that intense fear? Well, I mean, we're not in danger. There's no real harm to us, but we feel terrified, right? Well, not shocking when you think about the biological equipment that we have that regulates how we experience fear and anxiety. This is kind of not a silly one. I'm not trying to laugh at anybody, because I felt this, not anymore, but I was younger, and I back when I was terrified of public speaking, and I was terrified of all of human beings, just as a side note. But for a lot of people, making phone calls is a terrifying thing. Now, some people are probably watching this like, why would anybody ever be scared of making a phone call? Whereas some others are like, oh yeah, I don't like making calls. I know people who never eat pizza if they're by themselves because they don't want to call the delivery guy, right? But why? I mean, these are people you don't know. They're not people who have relevance in your lives, but we react with these intense sense of fear. So yeah, to summarize, the evolutionary argument, this organismic argument, sees emotions as biological, as products of evolution. So emotions as automatic responses to stimuli that produce these physiological changes in our bodies. So then what are the implications for deviance? Well, it depends on how we're asking that. So from the perspective of the model itself, there really aren't any. There are some if we go beyond the model, which I'll talk about. But since the organismic model ignores the issue of deviance, since the emotions, let me restate that. The organismic model essentially within itself ignores the issue of deviance, because essentially emotions are natural, they're biological. Then the question of so-called deviant emotions is really moot from the perspective of the model itself. So there wouldn't really be a, hey, this is deviant from within this perspective, just because the model itself isn't really concerned with deviance. But we can think about the model and draw out implications that go beyond what it's saying on its own terms. And we can do that by thinking about the ways in which our emotions don't fit in the world in which we live. So I already talked about this a bit, but when we get really scared of public speaking and it makes it difficult or impossible for us to accomplish the tasks that we want to do. So someone has a panic attack, or they mess up a presentation, all that because the fear that they're experiencing makes it impossible for them to accomplish this task. It can mess us up in job interviews, causes road rage incidents, and so on. So, again, our natural emotional responses are often unacceptable in modern society. So getting wildly angry may have made sense in the past, but or getting really scared or anxious or whatever may have made sense in the past when we were hunter-gatherers. Now those reactions are harmful. And so in many, many ways, this is an important point. In many ways, becoming a member of society is really about learning how to suppress the natural biological reactions that give us our emotions. Now, this is the same sort of thing that we talked about when we were talking about Emil Durkheim. If you remember in previous video, we talked about how from the moment a child is born, we impose upon that kid ways of thinking and acting that kid couldn't have come to on their own. So we compel the child to sleep at certain times. We compel the child to be quiet at certain times, to not go to the bathroom, whatever they want. So becoming socialized, becoming a member of society is to a large extent suppressing what our biology wants us essentially to do. And emotions are no different from that. So when our biology, our emotional biology, goes beyond our ability to cope, then those reactions can become deep. Okay. So that's really the main stuff I wanted to talk about for the organismic model. As a digression, though, one last thing, this is less relevant to the actual subject here, so this isn't going to turn into like a test question or anything. But I feel kind of bad in that the examples that I have given up to this point are just looking at things like anger and fear. And so I don't want to have anybody walk away from this lecture thinking, oh, well, we evolved to just be rage-filled and terrified. But that's not true. We have a wide range of emotions, and anger and fear are not dominant among them. The only reason why I used fear and anger is because it's so easy to see them physically, and there's so many examples, in nature and among people. It just really visually stands out. But things like affection and caring are just as rooted in our biology as other things. So, for instance, like a gorilla establishing dominance, right, among a tribe of gorillas, or a group of tribes, but among a group of gorillas. Yeah, that's a way for social relationships and social hierarchies to be reaffirmed and all that. But one of the things that we often don't realize is that if you are, the dominant gorilla in troop, is it troop? I don't know, that might be chimps, I don't know. But you build coalitions through things like mutual grooming and showing affection and things. Just like among humans, we reaffirm social connections through things like physical touch and connection, and that makes us feel good. Little baby, everybody loves babies, right? So among people, we have these feelings of love and affection and the desire to protect. Those are all very much relevant here too. We're not just angry, rage-filled dominance machines or terrified, just like being scared all the time. We're talking about a wide range of emotions. I only picked fear and anger, not because they're the most important or most prevalent, just because they're the easiest to think about. As a cute little baby. So the real implications for deviance for us is the idea that we evolved to live in an environment that led us to develop particular kinds of emotional reactions and the behaviors that go along with them. And that now we need to suppress those emotions in order to avoid deviant, in order to avoid being seen as wrong, right? So we have to deal with this disconnect between the social environment, the social world that we live in, and what our biology wants us to do. And if we can't do that, that's when we become deviant. All right. So it's our natural drives are what are causing the problem. Okay, when we're acting deviantly. So that's the organismic model. The next video is going to pick up the interactionist, which is going to not reject this perspective, but it is going to take it and it is going to add to it. Okay, so I will see you in part 3.